March 19, 1943. Guadalcanal. 6:47 in the morning. Lieutenant Samuel Stidger has made over 200 carrier landings. He has flown through anti-aircraft fire over Midway. He has fought Zeros at close range and come home with bullet holes in his fuselage and a steady hand on the controls. He is not a nervous man. He is not a reckless man. He is exactly the kind of pilot the United States Marine Corps needs in the Pacific in 1943. He is on final approach to Henderson Field after a 4-hour patrol over the slot. His engine is running clean. His fuel is adequate. There is no enemy contact, no combat damage, no emergency. He dies anyway. The F4U Corsair's nose pitches up slightly in the ground effect as he crosses the runway threshold. That enormous engine, that massive propeller sitting 13 feet in front of the cockpit, blocks his forward vision completely for 2 seconds. 2 seconds where Stidger cannot see the runway surface. 2 seconds where he is flying blind 100 feet above the ground at 110 miles per hour. He corrects left based on what he saw half a second ago. The correction is 4 degrees too sharp. The left wing dips. The wing tip catches the dirt at the edge of the runway. The aircraft cartwheels. By the time the fire crew reaches the wreck, there is nothing to save. Samuel Stidger did not die fighting the Japanese. He died because someone in an office in Connecticut designed a cockpit in the wrong position. He died because the most powerful fighter aircraft in the American inventory had a blind spot built directly into its geometry. He died because the people who ordered this aircraft into production knew about this problem and sent it to war anyway. This is not a story about a heroic aircraft. This is the story of how the most dangerous fighter in the Pacific almost destroyed the pilots it was supposed to protect. How 2 governments argued about whether it could be fixed. How one said it was impossible, and one said, "Watch us." And how the difference between those 2 answers changed the entire course of the war. Let us go back to the beginning. Vought Aircraft Company, Stratford, Connecticut, 1938. The United States Navy has a problem. Aircraft carrier aviation is evolving faster than anyone anticipated, and the Navy's current fighters are falling behind. The Brewster Buffalo, the primary carrier fighter of the late 1930s, tops out at 300 miles per hour. Intelligence reports from the Spanish Civil War and early combat in China suggest that the next generation of enemy fighters will be dramatically faster. The Navy needs something new, something that does not just match the competition, but destroys it. They issue a specification. They want a carrier-based fighter with a top speed of at least 380 miles per hour. For context, no carrier aircraft in the world in 1938 flies faster than 330. What the Navy is asking for does not exist yet. They want it in 3 years. Rex Beisel, chief designer at Vought, looks at the specification and makes a decision that will define everything that follows. The only way to hit 380 miles per hour on a carrier aircraft is to put the biggest, most powerful engine available into the smallest, lightest airframe possible. The engine he chooses is the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, 2,000 horsepower, the most powerful aircraft piston engine in existence. The problem is that this engine is enormous. The propeller required to efficiently convert 2,000 horsepower into thrust is 13 feet and 4 inches in diameter. Tip to tip, that propeller is wider than the wingspan of most existing fighter aircraft. To fit this combination into a carrier-capable airframe, Beisel's team does something nobody has done before. They bend the wings downward in an inverted gull shape, dropping sharply from the fuselage and then sweeping back up, so the landing gear legs can be short enough to clear that massive propeller, while still being strong enough for carrier landings. The result is visually striking, unmistakable. The bent wing gives the aircraft a predatory, slightly wrong appearance, like something that evolved for violence rather than flight. The prototype flies in May 1940 and immediately breaks the United States speed record for single-engine aircraft, 405 miles per hour. The Navy orders it into production before the test program is half finished. This is the first mistake. The problems appear quickly once test pilots begin serious evaluation. The cockpit sits so far back along the fuselage, behind that enormous engine, that forward visibility on approach to landing is severely restricted. Not uncomfortable, not inconvenient, severely restricted. On a long, flat runway on a calm day with good visibility, an experienced pilot can manage the blind spot by looking out to the side, lining up on peripheral references, trusting his peripheral vision and his instincts. It is unpleasant but workable. On a carrier deck in the Pacific, nothing about a landing is calm. The deck is moving. The deck is pitching up and down in ocean swells. The landing area is 300 feet long and 60 feet wide. You are coming in at 115 miles per hour. You have a 3-second window to catch an arresting wire with your tailhook. If you miss, you either go around or you go into the barriers and potentially flip the aircraft forward onto its nose. There are other aircraft parked forward of the barriers. There are deck crew everywhere. There is ocean on every side. In those conditions, a 2-second blind spot on final approach is not an inconvenience. It is a sentence. The carrier qualification trials begin in the fall of 1942 aboard the USS Sangamon off the coast of Virginia. The Navy assigns their best carrier pilots to the evaluation. These are men with thousands of flight hours, hundreds of carrier landings, the steadiest hands in naval aviation. They are not being set up to fail. The Navy genuinely wants this aircraft to work. It does not work. In 6 weeks of carrier qualification trials, there are 23 serious incidents. 2 pilots are killed, 4 aircraft are destroyed. The landing gear, designed with an unusual horizontal strut to absorb dive bomber-style impact loads, compresses on touchdown, and then rebounds violently, bouncing the aircraft back into the air at a moment when the pilot has already cut the throttle and committed to the landing. The deck crew gives it a name immediately. They call it the Ensign Eliminator. They are not laughing when they say it. There is also an oil cooler positioned in the wing root that, under normal flight conditions, weeps a thin film of oil onto the inside of the windscreen. Not enough to block vision entirely. Enough to blur it. Enough that on a difficult approach in low light, a pilot is squinting through a greasy smear on the glass, trying to judge a 3-second landing window on a moving deck. This is not a combat damage issue. This is how the aircraft comes from the factory. Rear Admiral John Towers receives the Evaluation Board's final report in November 1942. The recommendation is unambiguous. The F4U Corsair is not suitable for carrier operations. The deficiencies are structural, ergonomic, and aerodynamic. Correcting them will require significant redesign and a new production delay that the war cannot absorb. Towers has already ordered 2,012 of these aircraft. He sits with this report for 3 days. Then he makes a phone call to Marine Corps Aviation Command. The Marines are getting the Corsair. The language used in the official transfer is carefully neutral. The F4U is being allocated to Marine Corps land-based squadrons in the Pacific Theater, where its exceptional performance characteristics can be fully utilized. That is what the paperwork says. What the paperwork does not say is that the Navy evaluated this aircraft for carrier operations and decided it was too dangerous, and rather than send it back to Vault for expensive redesign, the Navy is sending it to the Marines because the Marines fly off dirt strips in the jungle and cannot complain about carrier landing characteristics they will never need to use. The Marines are not told this. They are told they are receiving the most advanced fighter in the American arsenal. They are told the Japanese Zero will not be able to touch them. They are told to be grateful. Major Gregory Boyington, who will later become the most famous Marine fighter pilot of the war, sees his first Corsair on a flight line in San Diego in December 1942. He walks around it slowly. He looks at the bent wings, the massive engine cowling, the tall landing gear. He puts his hand on the fuselage and feels the solid weight of the airframe. He climbs into the cockpit and looks over that long nose at the runway ahead, and then at the total absence of runway when he tilts the nose up slightly. He climbs back out and says nothing for a long moment. Then he turns to the crew chief, standing nearby. "How many guys has this thing killed so far?" The crew chief looks at the ground. Boyington nods. He already knows the answer is not 0. By February 1943, the first Marine Corsair squadrons are operational in the Solomon Islands. By March, the pattern that will define the next 6 months is already established. In the air, the Corsair is everything it promised. It is faster than the Zero. It climbs faster above 15,000 feet. In a diving attack, it is essentially untouchable. Marine pilots who get good with it are genuinely dangerous, and the Japanese know it. On the ground, coming back from missions, the aircraft keeps killing its own men. The landing accident rate in the first 3 months of Solomon's operations is classified. The numbers are not shared between squadrons. The after-action reports use language like pilot error and adverse conditions rather than fundamental design deficiency. A pilot who died because he could not see through the nose of his aircraft on final approach is recorded as having misjudged his approach. A pilot whose landing gear bounced him back into the air and into the barrier is recorded as having used improper technique. The language protects the aircraft. The pilots keep dying. Between February and May 1943, Marine aviation loses more Corsair pilots to landing accidents than to enemy action. This fact does not appear in any official summary. It does not appear in any press release. It does not appear in any of the enthusiastic articles about the new American superfighter that are running in newspapers back home. It appears only in the private letters of the men who are watching their friends die on the way home from missions they survived. One letter, written by Corporal James Whitfield, a ground crew member with VMF 124, to his brother in Ohio in April 1943, reads as follows: "We have the fastest plane over here, and it kills more of our guys than it does theirs. I am not supposed to say that. I am saying it anyway, because you should know that not everything over here is the way they tell it in the papers. Whitfield is right. Not everything is the way they tell it. And the landing problem is only half the story. Because while the Marines are dying on approach to their own runways, the Corsairs that do land safely are going back up the next day and spending thousands of rounds of ammunition shooting at Japanese aircraft and missing. The guns work. The ammunition works. The pilots are skilled. The aircraft is fast, and somehow the kill ratios are catastrophic. Nobody yet understands why. Nobody is looking in the right place. The answer is hiding inside the geometry of the wing gun mounts in a set of angles that a Vought engineer calculated at a desk in Connecticut, and nobody in the Pacific has questioned since. Nobody except a 26-year-old Marine sergeant who never finished high school, who joined the Corps because it was steady pay during the Depression, and who has spent the last 3 months watching gun camera footage in a maintenance tent and doing mathematics that nobody asked him to do. But that problem and that sergeant belong to the next chapter. Right now, in the spring of 1943, the score reads as follows. The Navy rejected the Corsair. The Marines inherited it and are bleeding because of it. And across the Atlantic, a British Fleet Air Arm engineer named Eric Brown has just flown the aircraft for the first time and written 14 pages of notes about everything that is wrong with it and exactly how each problem can be fixed. The Americans said it was impossible. Brown disagrees. September 12th, 1943, 11:23 in the morning, somewhere over the Solomon Islands, Captain James Sweat has a 0 in his gun sight. Perfect position. Diving from above and behind, exactly the way they teach it. The 0 pilot has not seen him yet. Sweat is close enough to see the red circles on the wings. Close enough to see the canopy framing. Close enough that missing should be physically impossible. He presses the trigger. 400 rounds leave his 6 guns in the next 8 seconds. He watches the tracers reach out toward the 0 in a long, spreading cone. He watches them pass above the cockpit, below the engine, wide left of the fuselage. He watches a perfect envelope of fire surround the Japanese aircraft like a cage with nothing solid inside it. The 0 rolls away untouched and disappears into cloud. Sweat levels off and stares at his ammunition counter. He has expended 400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. He has 0 confirmed hits. In front of him, somewhere in that cloud, the Japanese pilot is alive and will be back over Guadalcanal in 11 minutes. Behind Sweat, his wingman Lieutenant Danny Cunningham is fighting 2 zeros alone because Sweat has been chasing this single aircraft for 3 minutes without killing it. Cunningham's voice comes over the radio. It is not words. It is a single short sound, the kind a person makes when something unexpected and final happens to them. Sweat breaks right and looks back. Cunningham's Corsair is falling, not damaged, not limping, falling, in the specific way an aircraft falls when the pilot is no longer flying it, trailing black smoke from the engine, rotating slowly around its own axis. It enters the jungle canopy at a shallow angle and disappears. No parachute. Sweat flies home alone. He lands, climbs out of the cockpit, and sits on the wing for a while without saying anything. The ground crew chief, Corporal Eddie Wilkins, starts doing the post-flight inspection and stops when he gets to the ammunition bays. He opens the panels, checks the round counts, and does the arithmetic. He walks up to Sweat very carefully. "Sir, you fired 400 rounds." Sweat does not look up. "Yes, sir." "Do you have any confirmed kills from this mission?" "No." Wilkins writes it down in the maintenance log and says nothing else because there is nothing useful to say. The number he writes down, 890 rounds expended per confirmed kill for the squadron this week, is the worst ratio in the entire Pacific Theater. The Hellhawks of VMF 213 are burning through ammunition at a rate that would empty their supply depot in 6 weeks. They are hitting Japanese aircraft with scattered, non-lethal rounds, enough to annoy, not enough to destroy. And the Japanese pilots have noticed. 3 days earlier, Navy intelligence distributed a translated Japanese radio intercept from September 9th. The translation is clipped to the wall of every Marine Squadron ready room in the Solomons. It reads, "The Corsair pilots are fast, but their shooting is weak. Their bullets scatter like rain. When their guns go empty, attack. They cannot hit accurately. Remain patient. The Japanese are not guessing. They have studied the pattern over weeks of combat. They know the Corsair will fire a long burst from distance. They know most of those rounds will miss. They know that if they can force the Marine pilot to burn his ammunition without scoring killing hits, the Corsair becomes a fast, unarmed aircraft that they can chase at their leisure. They are baiting the Marines. And the Marines are taking the bait every single time because nobody yet understands why the guns are failing, and the official answer from above is always the same. Shoot better. To understand what is actually happening, you need to understand one piece of physics that nobody is explaining to the pilots. When Vought aircraft engineers designed the F4U, they mounted 6 50 caliber machine guns across 16 feet of wing, 3 guns in each wing. The guns point slightly inward so that their bullet streams, which spread apart naturally as they leave the barrels, converge at a single point in front of the aircraft. At that convergence point, all 6 guns are hitting the same area simultaneously. 6 guns firing together at 1,800 rounds per minute each is 110 bullets per second, arriving in the same space. That is not a weapon. That is a physics problem for whatever it hits. The factory setting places that convergence point at 1,000 feet in front of the aircraft. The Vought engineers had reasonable logic. At 1,000 feet, a pilot has time to aim, time to track the target, time to fire a sustained burst as the enemy crosses through the convergence zone. The mathematics worked perfectly on paper in Connecticut. In the air over the Solomon Islands, 1,000 feet is not where dogfights happen. When a Zero and a Corsair are actually fighting, not positioning, not maneuvering for advantage, but genuinely shooting at each other, the engagement distance is 200 to 400 yards. That is 600 to 1,200 feet. At 1,000 feet convergence, the bullet pattern from 6 guns spreads to cover a circle 30 feet wide. A Japanese Zero has a wingspan of 39 feet. Statistically, some rounds should hit. And they do. They hit the wingtips. They hit the tail assembly. They punch holes in fabric-covered control surfaces. They score dozens of non-lethal hits per engagement, enough to show up on gun camera film as apparent success. Not enough concentrated in one place to actually bring the aircraft down. The Zero keeps flying. The Marine pilot has burned 200 rounds and thinks he nearly had it. He sets up for another pass and burns 200 more. After 4 passes, he is out of ammunition and the Zero is still in the air, leaking slightly, its pilot mildly annoyed. Marine pilots are not missing because they cannot shoot. They are missing because the geometric spread of their bullets at combat range means the target passes through the pattern without receiving enough concentrated energy in any single location to cause catastrophic damage. The pilots do not know this. The squadron commanders do not know this. Lieutenant Colonel William Millington, Marine Aircraft Group 11 Operations Officer, issues a memorandum in August 1943 stating that gun convergence below 500 feet exceeds safe structural limits for the F4U airframe and that pilots must engage targets at optimal range. Optimal range means 1,000 feet. The memo essentially tells pilots that if they are missing, they are doing it wrong. Nobody questions the memo because Millington has an engineering background and the authority that comes with rank, and the whole system is built around the assumption that the engineers already solved the aircraft problems before it came to the squadron. The engineers did not solve this problem. The engineers created it. Now let us talk about the Japanese side of this equation. Because the Japanese are not simply the enemy in this story, they are the measuring instrument. The way they respond to the Corsair tells us exactly what is wrong with it. Warrant Officer Kenji Okabe is a Zero pilot with the Tainan Air Group. He has 31 confirmed kills. He is one of the most experienced combat aviators in the Imperial Japanese Navy. He has been flying over the Solomon Islands since August 1943, and he has fought Corsairs on 8 separate occasions. He is still alive, which means he has figured something out. Okabe's method, reconstructed from post-war interviews and his personal combat diary which survived the war, is precise and deliberate. When he sees a Corsair diving on him from above, he does not run. He turns into the attack, forcing the Corsair pilot to either break off or commit to a snapshot at very close range. At close range, the convergence problem disappears because the bullet spread is tighter. But Okabe knows that American pilots have been trained to fire from distance. They will almost always take the long shot. He lets them take it. He watches the tracers spread around him and he counts. He knows from experience that a Marine pilot firing from 300 yards will use approximately 150 to 200 rounds in a typical burst. He waits for the firing to stop. In the brief moment after the burst ends, when the Marine is evaluating whether he scored hits, Okabe reverses and attacks. The Corsair is faster, but the Zero turns inside it, with room to spare. The attack window is small, but it is enough. Of the 8 Corsairs Okabe has engaged, he has shot down 3 of them in exactly this manner. Not by outflying the Corsair, by understanding its ammunition problem better than its own pilots do. On September 14, 1943, General Roy Geiger, commander of the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, assembles his squadron commanders at a meeting on Guadalcanal. The room is hot. The men are tired. Geiger stands in front of a chalkboard covered in numbers. Kill ratios, ammunition expenditure rates, loss statistics. He does not soften what he is about to say. Gentlemen, we have the best aircraft in this theater. We have the best pilots. We are losing because we cannot hit what we shoot at. I need solutions, and I need them before the end of this month. Every man in this room has 2 weeks to bring me an answer, or I start questioning whether our pilots belong in these cockpits. Nobody speaks, because nobody has an answer. The guns work. The ammunition works. The aircraft is fast and powerful. Every variable the commanders can identify checks out correctly. The problem is invisible to everyone in that room. Everyone except one person who was not invited to the meeting. Staff Sergeant Michael McCarthy is 26 years old. He was born in South Boston on March 8, 1917. His father ran a garage. McCarthy grew up rebuilding engines before he was old enough to drive them. He has no college education. He has no engineering degree. He joined the Marine Corps in 1938 because the Depression had taken the garage and there was no other work. The Corps made him an aviation ordnance man. His job is loading ammunition, maintaining the gun systems, clearing jams, and cleaning the breech mechanisms after each flight. He is not an engineer. He is not a tactician. In the rigid hierarchy of the military, his opinions about aircraft design are worth exactly nothing. McCarthy has been watching gun camera footage every night for 3 months, not because anyone asked him to, not because it is his job, because he cannot stop thinking about the numbers. 890 rounds per kill. Pilots burning through their entire ammunition load and coming home with gun cameras full of footage showing tracers spreading around Japanese aircraft like water around a stone. On the night of September 17, 1943, after reviewing Captain Sweat's gun camera film from the mission where Cunningham died, McCarthy does something unusual. He walks to the armory and asks the clerk for the F4U technical manual, specifically the section on gun harmonization. The clerk looks at him the way people look at someone who has wandered into the wrong building. Ordnance men do not read harmonization specifications. That is engineering department material. But it is late and the clerk is tired and McCarthy is polite about it. So the clerk hands over the manual and goes back to sleep. McCarthy reads it 3 times. Then he takes a flashlight and walks out to the flight line. He climbs up onto the wing of Corsair Bureau No. 1, 7883, Captain Sweat's aircraft, the one with the single worst ammunition expenditure rate in the squadron. He measures the distance between the inboard and outboard gun mounts, 16 feet and 3 inches. He measures the angle of each gun mount using a tool he improvises from a protractor and a piece of wire. He writes the numbers down on the back of a maintenance form. Then he sits on the wing in the dark and does the mathematics in his head. The mathematics are not complicated. They are the same basic trigonometry he learned fixing car headlights in his father's garage in South Boston. 2 points a known distance apart. A desired convergence point at a known distance ahead. The angle required to make the lines meet. He runs the numbers for 1,000 feet. He runs them for 500 feet. He runs them for 300 feet. At 300 feet convergence, the arithmetic changes completely. At 300 feet, all 6 guns concentrate their fire into a circle, approximately 6 feet in diameter. Not 30 feet. 6 feet. The size of a dinner table. A 0 is 39 feet wide. At 300 feet, convergence with all 6 guns, firing for 1 second, 80 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition arrive in a 6-foot space. 80 rounds of 50 caliber in 1 second in one location delivers kinetic energy equivalent to a small artillery shell. The 0 does not get hit. The 0 ceases to be a structurally coherent object. McCarthy does the calculation twice more to make sure. Then he does a second calculation. At 300 feet convergence, bullets reach the target in approximately 1/3 of a second instead of nearly a full second. In 1/3 of a second, a 0 traveling at 250 miles per hour moves only about 40 feet. The lead calculation becomes dramatically simpler. Pilots are not missing because they cannot aim. They are missing because they are aiming at where the target was, not where it is, and the wide convergence means even a good shot creates only a thin hit probability across the target's path. McCarthy stares at the numbers for a long time. The engineers set convergence at 1,000 feet. Every expert in marine aviation has accepted 1,000 feet. Lieutenant Colonel Millington has issued a written order saying that convergence cannot be set below 500 feet without risking structural failure of the wing gun mounts under recoil stress. McCarthy thinks about Cunningham falling into the jungle. He thinks about 890 rounds per kill. He thinks about the Japanese radio intercept pinned to the ready room wall. Their bullets scatter like rain. He climbs down off the wing, walks to the maintenance tent, and starts looking for reinforcement steel. He is not going to ask permission. He already knows what asking permission looks like. It goes through the squadron armorer to the maintenance officer to the squadron commander to the group operations officer to wing engineering to Bureau of Aeronautics. Committees form. Studies are commissioned. Experts cite regulations. The war ends, or everyone dies, before anything changes. McCarthy is going to fix Sweat's guns tonight and let the results speak for whatever they need to speak for. Corporal Eddie Wilkins finds him in the maintenance tent at midnight, cutting steel plate with a hacksaw. "What are you doing, Mickey?" McCarthy looks up. He is calm. He has the look of a man who has already decided something and finished worrying about the consequences. "I am adjusting some bolts," McCarthy says. He works through the night. The adjustment takes 6 hours. By 4 in the morning, Corsair 17883 has its gun convergence set to 300 feet. Reinforced with hand-cut steel brackets McCarthy fabricated from a damaged wing panel. He bore sights each gun individually, using a method his father taught him for aligning headlights. He test fires 20 rounds per gun into the ocean in the pre-dawn darkness. The brackets hold. No cracks. No structural failure. The reinforcement McCarthy designed from instinct and memory turns out to be stronger than the original factory mounting. At 6 in the morning, Captain Sweat walks onto the flight line for the morning patrol and stops dead when he sees his gun barrels pointing inward at a noticeably steeper angle than before. McCarthy is standing next to the aircraft. He comes to attention. Sweat looks at the guns for a long time. Then he looks at McCarthy. "What did you do?" McCarthy tells him. "Everything. The math, the geometry, the 300 feet, the 6-foot impact circle, the physics of why the current setup is failing every pilot in the squadron." Sweat listens without interrupting. He is quiet for almost a full minute afterward. "If this kills me," he says finally, "I am going to be very upset with you." McCarthy nods. "Yes, sir. If it works," Sweat says, "I need you to do every aircraft in this squadron." McCarthy nods again. "Yes, sir, I figured." Sweat climbs into the cockpit. The morning patrol launches at 0730. At 0847, Captain James Sweat intercepts 9 Japanese Zeros and 6 Val dive bombers over Empress Augusta Bay. He closes to 300 feet on the trailing Zero, fires a 1-second burst, and watches the tail section shear off the aircraft as though it was cut with a blade. The Zero falls in 3 pieces. Sweat lines up on the next Zero. 300 feet. 1 second. The cockpit implodes. The aircraft rolls inverted and does not recover. Third Zero. 280 feet. Half-second burst. The engine separates from the fuselage. The aircraft falls straight down. Total ammunition expended. 200 rounds. 3 kills. 45 seconds. Sweat keys his radio. His voice is not the voice of a man who is surprised. It is the voice of a man who has just understood something that should have been obvious from the beginning. He says, they never had a chance. October 3rd, 1943. R.N.A.S. Stretton, England. 9:14 in the morning. Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown walks around the Corsair on the tarmac for a full 4 minutes before he climbs into it. He touches the bent wing. He crouches under the fuselage and looks up at the undercarriage geometry. He stands behind the tail and sights forward along the fuselage line, measuring with his eyes the distance between the cockpit and the tip of that enormous propeller spinner. He has a notepad in his left hand. He is already writing. Brown has flown 47 different aircraft types. He will eventually fly 487, more than any human being in history. He knows what a well-designed aircraft looks like, and he knows what a compromised one looks like. The Corsair is both simultaneously, which is the most interesting kind of problem. He climbs in and flies it. 3 hours later, he lands, walks to his office, and begins writing what will become a 14-page evaluation report. The first paragraph reads as follows. The F4U Corsair is without question the most capable fighter aircraft currently available to Allied naval forces. It is also, in its present configuration, entirely unsuitable for carrier operations. These two facts are not contradictory. They are an engineering problem. Engineering problems have solutions. The Americans read the first sentence of that paragraph and stopped. The British read the last two sentences and went to work. This difference matters more than it sounds. When the United States Navy evaluated the Corsair for carrier operations in late 1942, they approached the problem as administrators. They had a checklist. The aircraft failed the checklist. The checklist said carrier unsuitable. The decision was made and the file was closed. Nobody asked the next question, which is the only question that actually matters in engineering. Why does it fail? And what would need to change? The Fleet Air Arm in 1943 does not have the luxury of closing files. Britain is in its 4th year of war. The Royal Navy has been fighting in the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, and the Arctic simultaneously. Their carrier-based aircraft are obsolete. The Fulmar fighter they are flying over the Norwegian coast has a top speed of 272 miles per hour. German fighters are doing 400. British carrier pilots are not dying because of bad tactics or poor training. They are dying because the mathematics of the aircraft they are flying make survival statistically improbable. When the Corsairs arrive through Lend-Lease, the Fleet Air Arm does not see a rejected American design. They see the difference between living and dying. They cannot afford to say impossible. So they do not say it. Eric Brown's 14 pages are a map. Here is every deficiency. Here is the precise nature of each failure. Here is the sequence in which the problems need to be addressed. The cockpit visibility problem on approach is the most dangerous. The landing gear bounce is the most frequent. The oil on the windscreen is the most straightforwardly fixable. Brown attacks them in reverse order of difficulty, starting with what is easy and building toward what everyone else has decided cannot be done. The oil leak is solved in 2 weeks. A revised seal on the cooler outlet. One part, done. The landing gear bounce takes longer. The horizontal strut design that causes the rebound is fundamental to the undercarriage geometry, which means it cannot simply be replaced. Brown's team instead develops a technique. By adding 6 inches of additional rubber compression travel to the strut stops and adjusting the oleo pressure, they reduce the rebound from 12 feet to approximately 3 feet. Not eliminated. Reduced to manageable. A pilot who knows it is coming can hold the aircraft down through the bounce with throttle and stick. It requires practice, and it requires briefing every pilot specifically. But it works. The visibility problem is the one that everyone said was impossible, and it is the one that Brown is most interested in. The core of the carrier landing visibility problem is this. On a straight-in approach to a carrier deck, a pilot must be able to see the deck throughout the final 30 seconds of flight. The Corsair's nose blocks that view. The standard solution would be to redesign the cockpit position, which means redesigning the aircraft, which takes years nobody has. Brown does not redesign the aircraft. He redesigns the approach. Instead of a straight final approach, Brown develops what he calls a curved approach. The pilot flies a continuous, gentle left turn all the way to the deck, keeping the carrier visible off his left wing throughout the descent, using the ship's deck edge as his reference, rather than looking straight ahead over the nose. At the last possible moment, perhaps 3 seconds before touchdown, he rolls level and lands. The nose is still blocking forward vision. But by that point, the pilot already knows exactly where the deck is, exactly what his sink rate is, exactly what correction is needed. The blind spot at the moment of touchdown is manageable because everything leading up to it was visible. It sounds simple. It is not simple. It requires completely retraining instincts that naval aviators have built over hundreds of hours of straight-in approaches. It requires a new scan pattern, a new reference system, a new way of interpreting the visual information coming through the canopy in the final seconds of flight. It requires every pilot to unlearn something before they can learn the new method. Brown spends 6 weeks training himself on the technique before he teaches it to anyone else. He makes 47 practice approaches on land before he takes it to a ship. He documents every error, every variation, every condition under which the technique breaks down, and what the pilot must do to recover it. He treats it like a scientific experiment. By the time he is finished, he has a procedure that works, that is teachable, and that has been tested enough times to have genuine confidence behind it. On December 14th, 1943, Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown lands a Corsair on the deck of HMS Illustrious. First attempt. Daytime. Calm sea. He catches wire 3, exactly the target wire. The aircraft stays on the deck. No bounce significant enough to cause a problem. No visibility crisis. Clean landing. He shuts down the engine and sits in the cockpit for a moment. The deck crew is watching him. The ship's captain is watching from the bridge. Everyone is waiting for the evaluation. Brown climbs out, walks to the deck edge, looks back at where the aircraft stopped, and writes one sentence in his notepad. It works. What happens next is one of the most quietly extraordinary bureaucratic moments of the Second World War. Brown sends his full report and his approach procedure documentation to the Bureau of Aeronautics in Washington. The cover letter is professional and precise. It states that the Fleet Air Arm has successfully developed carrier landing procedures for the F4U Corsair, that the aircraft is fully operational from carrier decks using the documented curved approach technique, and that the Royal Navy intends to deploy Corsair-equipped carrier squadrons in the coming months. The Bureau of Aeronautics receives this report in January 1944. the Bureau of Aeronautics does not respond for 6 weeks. When the response comes, it is 3 paragraphs long. It thanks the Fleet Air Arm for their evaluation. It notes that the Bureau will conduct its own assessment of the proposed procedures. It does not say, "Thank you for solving a problem we gave up on." It does not say the Royal Navy has accomplished something we declared impossible. It says the Bureau will conduct its own assessment. The assessment takes 4 months. During those 4 months, the United States Navy continues to keep the Corsair off its carrier decks. During those 4 months, the Royal Navy deploys Corsair squadrons from HMS Victorious and HMS Illustrious into the Indian Ocean and begins combat operations. In April 1944, Operation Cockpit. British Corsairs, flying from carriers attacked Japanese, held Sabang in Sumatra. The aircraft that America said could not fly from a carrier flies from a carrier and strikes a target 700 miles from the nearest land base. The pilots use Brown's curved approach to land back aboard in deteriorating weather, with fuel states that would have made a missed approach fatal. All aircraft recover safely. In June 1944, the United States Navy quietly announces that the F4U Corsair has been cleared for carrier operations following successful fleet evaluation of new approach procedures. The announcement does not mention Eric Brown. It does not mention the Fleet Air Arm. It does not mention that the Royal Navy solved this problem 6 months earlier and sent Washington the solution in writing. It describes the curved approach technique as the result of Bureau of Aeronautics analysis and fleet testing. Eric Brown reads the announcement in his office at RNAS Stretton. He reads it twice. He sets it down on his desk. A junior officer asks him what he thinks. Brown is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "The important thing is that pilots will not die on landing anymore. That is the whole point." He means it. He is not being diplomatic. Eric Brown is one of those rare people who genuinely cares more about the outcome than the credit. But the junior officer standing across the desk is young and angry on Brown's behalf, and he says what Brown will not say. "They took your work and put their name on it, sir." Brown picks up his pen and goes back to writing. "I know," he says. "Now let us make sure the next problem gets solved faster." By the summer of 1944, the Corsair is finally what it was always supposed to be. The landing problem is solved. McCarthy's gun convergence modification has spread to every F4U in the Pacific. The aircraft is operating from carriers and from land bases simultaneously, carrying the air war forward in both the Pacific and the Indian Ocean theaters. The Japanese have a name for it now. Not the official designation. Not the F4U. They call it Whistling Death, because of the distinctive sound the air makes through the Corsair's distinctive wing intake when it dives. When Japanese ground troops on Pacific Islands hear that sound coming from above, they do not look up. They get into whatever hole is nearest, and they wait. The aircraft that the Navy said was too dangerous, the aircraft that the Marines inherited as a reject, the aircraft that killed its own pilots on landing and scattered its bullets uselessly across the sky. That aircraft is now the most feared fighter in the Pacific theater. And it is about to face its hardest test. Because it is 1945, and the Japanese have a new weapon. A weapon with no cockpit instrumentation to jam, no pilot who can be frightened, no engine that can be damaged enough to matter. A weapon that is the pilot. And the only aircraft fast enough, tough enough, and now accurate enough to stop it before it reaches the fleet is the one that almost nobody wanted. The Corsair's last battle, and its most important one, is just beginning. April 6, 1945, 14 miles southwest of Okinawa, 2:47 in the afternoon. Lieutenant Robert Klingman is at 23,000 feet when he sees it. Not a Zero, not a Betty bomber, not anything with a tactical purpose beyond the moment of impact. It is a Mitsubishi A6M loaded with 250 kilograms of high explosive, its fuel tanks filled to exactly the amount needed to reach the fleet and nothing more. No return fuel, no reason for return fuel. The pilot inside is 22 years old. His name is in a ledger at a base on Kyushu, alongside 43 other names from this morning's mission. By nightfall, every name on that list will be crossed out. The Japanese call them Shinpu, Divine Wind. The Americans call them Kamikaze. And they are killing the United States Navy at a rate that nothing in the American arsenal has been able to stop. In the first week of April 1945 alone, Kamikaze attacks sink 3 destroyers, damage 19 other vessels, and kill nearly 400 American sailors. The mathematics are brutal and simple. A kamikaze pilot does not need to be a skilled aviator. He does not need combat training. He does not need to maneuver, evade, or survive. He needs only to point his aircraft at a ship and hold course. Anti-aircraft guns can track him. They often cannot stop him in time. By the moment the gunners have a firing solution, the aircraft is already inside the minimum safe range for the fuses to arm. The only reliable way to stop a kamikaze is to intercept it before it reaches the fleet. Far out, high up, before it begins its final dive. And the only American aircraft fast enough, flying high enough, and now accurate enough to do this consistently is the one that the Navy rejected 3 years ago and gave to the Marines as a second-hand problem. The Corsair. Klingman pushes his throttle forward and begins climbing. His guns have a problem. At 23,000 feet in the extreme cold, the gun lubrication has thickened to the consistency of paste. When he pressed the trigger 30 seconds ago on a different contact, nothing happened. All 6 guns are frozen. He is flying the most lethal fighter in the Pacific with weapons that will not fire. Any rational calculation says, turn back. Report the frozen guns. Return to the carrier. Let someone else take this intercept. Klingman does not turn back. He closes on the kamikaze from behind and above, using the Corsair's superior speed to overtake. He pulls alongside close enough to read the markings on the fuselage, close enough to see the pilot turn his head and look at him, a 22-year-old face. Klingman does not describe what expression he saw. He never talks about that part. What he does next is not in any training manual and not in any tactical doctrine. He rams his propeller into the kamikaze's tail assembly. 3 deliberate passes. Each time the Corsair's 13-foot propeller blade chews through the Japanese aircraft's control surfaces. Rudder gone. Elevator gone. The kamikaze begins losing altitude control, spiraling gradually, no longer able to hold course toward the fleet. On the 3rd pass, the tail structure fails completely. The aircraft rolls inverted and enters a dive it cannot recover from. It hits the ocean 4 miles from the nearest American ship. Klingman flies his damaged Corsair back to the carrier, with 2 propeller blades bent and a 3rd one missing entirely. The aircraft vibrates so violently on approach that the deck crew thinks the engine is failing. He lands it anyway. He catches the wire. He shuts down the engine and sits in the cockpit for a moment. When the deck officer climbs up and asks if he is injured, Klingman looks at him and says, "My guns were frozen. I used what I had." This is what the Corsair has become by 1945. Not just a weapon, a standard. An aircraft so capable and so trusted that its pilots will do things with it that should not be possible, because they know the aircraft will hold together when nothing else would. The Kamikaze campaign over Okinawa runs from April through June 1945. It is the largest and most concentrated aerial assault in the history of naval warfare. The Japanese send 1,900 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet during those 3 months. They sink 36 ships and damage over 300 more. 493 American sailors die from kamikaze strikes in a single week in April. The number that does not appear in most histories is this one. The Corsair intercepts over 1,000 kamikaze aircraft before they reach the fleet. The kill ratio of Corsair pilots against kamikazes during the Okinawa campaign is 11-1. 11 enemy aircraft destroyed for every Corsair lost. For context, the overall American fighter kill ratio against conventional Japanese aircraft in 1942 was 3-1. 3 years of war, McCarthy's gun modification, Brown's carrier procedures, and the accumulated combat experience of Marine and Navy Corsair pilots produced an aircraft and a force that was nearly 4 times more lethal than what existed at the beginning. But the numbers do not capture what it actually felt like to fly those intercepts. Major Jefferson DeBlanc, Marine Corsair pilot, VMF 312, writes in his personal diary on April 12, 1945, "We flew 4 intercept missions today. 4. My hand stopped shaking between the second and third, but came back for the 4th. The kamikazes are not like fighting a Zero. A Zero pilot is trying to survive. He maneuvers. He evades. He has a future he is trying to protect. A kamikaze does not maneuver. He does not evade. You shoot him, and he keeps coming because he was already committed before you fired. You have to destroy the aircraft completely. Not damage it. Destroy it. If you leave the engine running and the pilot conscious, he will fly the burning wreck into the nearest ship. We brought down 11 today. 2 got through. 1 hit a destroyer escort. I watched it from altitude on my way back to the ship. There was a column of smoke for an hour. I keep thinking about the fact that these are not accidents. They are choices. 22-year-old boys who chose this. I do not know what to do with that." DeBlanc's diary entry captures something the official statistics cannot: the psychological weight of the Okinawa campaign on the pilots flying it. They are not fighting an enemy who wants to live. They are fighting an enemy who has already decided not to. Every tactical instinct developed across years of combat, every technique for reading what an opponent will do next, is useless. You cannot predict a man who has made his final decision before he took off. The Corsair pilots adapt. They develop new intercept geometry specifically for kamikazes. Get above. Get fast. Get behind. Fire early. Fire long. Fire until the aircraft is not an aircraft anymore. McCarthy's 300-foot convergence, designed for dogfighting Zeros in 1943, turns out to be equally lethal against kamikazes because the concentration of fire is dense enough to destroy an aircraft in less than 1 second of trigger time. There is no margin for scattered hits. There is no second chance if the first burst only damages. The 6-foot impact circle that McCarthy calculated on a Corsair wing in the dark in 1943 is the difference between stopping the Kamikaze 2 miles out and watching it hit a ship full of men. One modification, made by one sergeant with a hacksaw and a piece of scrap steel, still saving lives 2 years later, 5,000 miles from the maintenance tent where it was invented. June 22, 1945. The Okinawa campaign ends. The island is secured. The Kamikaze sorties stop. The fleet counts its losses and its survivors. The Marine Corps counts its Corsair pilots. Of the pilots who flew the full Okinawa campaign from beginning to end, the survival rate is 67%. In the early Solomon's campaign of 1943, before the gun modification, before the carrier procedures, before the accumulated tactical knowledge, the survival rate for Marine fighter pilots was 41%. The difference between 41% and 67% is not a new aircraft. The aircraft was the same. The difference is what 3 people did to it. A sergeant who adjusted some bolts, a lieutenant commander who redesigned an approach, and the pilots who trusted both of them enough to use what they built. The war ends on September 2nd, 1945. Staff Sergeant Michael McCarthy mustered out of the Marine Corps in December 1945 and went back to Boston. He opened a garage on Commonwealth Avenue, fixed cars, married a school teacher named Helen, and never talked about the war. When customers asked what he did in the Marines, he told them he loaded ammunition. When they pressed, he said he adjusted some equipment. Nothing special. He died of a heart attack on July 8, 1979. He was 62 years old. His obituary in the Boston Globe was 4 sentences long. It said he was a Marine Corps veteran. It said he was survived by his wife and 2 daughters. It did not say that his mathematical calculation on a dark Pacific airstrip in 1943 was still influencing the design of American fighter aircraft 30 years later. Eric Brown retired from the Royal Navy in 1970 with the rank of captain. He held the world record for aircraft types flown until his death in 2016. He gave lectures at aviation conferences for 40 years. He was knowledgeable, precise, modest. He discussed the curved approach technique as a technical problem he found interesting. He did not discuss the Bureau of Aeronautics announcement that credited his work to their own engineers. When interviewers asked him about it directly, late in his life, he said the same thing he said to that junior officer in 1944. The important thing is that pilots stopped dying on landing. That was the whole point. The F4U Corsair flew its last American combat mission in the Korean War in 1953. 11 years of operational service. Over 12,000 aircraft built. A kill ratio across its entire service life of 11.3 to 1, the highest of any American piston engine fighter in the Second World War. It was rejected by the Navy before the war started. It was given to the Marines as a problem nobody wanted. It killed more Japanese aircraft per American loss than any other fighter in the Pacific. The gap between those 3 sentences is not luck. It is not fate. It is the specific actions of specific people who looked at a broken machine and refused to accept that broken was permanent. McCarthy, with his wrench. Brown, with his notepad. Klingman, with his propeller. Sweat, with 400 wasted rounds, and a dead wingman, and the willingness to let a sergeant try something unauthorized on his aircraft. History remembers the aircraft. The bent wing, the enormous engine, the whistling death. It should remember the people who made it worth fearing, because the Corsair did not win the Pacific Air War. the people who refused to give up on it did.